Hello, everyone. Just a quick reminder that our next UAS vocation course starts on August 5th. This is a super cool, fully online course taught by yours truly. In the class, you're going to earn your Part 107, fly with our cutting edge simulator, create 3D maps and models with Drone Deploy, and become a level 1 thermographer. Learn more at clemsondrone.com. Now, back to the show. Welcome to the Clemson Drone Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burgett from Clemson University. Join me as I dive into the world of drone technology and explore its impact through the eyes of industry leaders. Hear how drone technology directly supports public agencies, private companies, and entrepreneurs from those leading the innovation. If you're a seasoned UAS program manager or just getting into the game, this is a place to learn from the best to help your program soar to new heights. Make sure you subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a single episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. At Clemson Drone, the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. Hello, everyone. This is Joe Burgett with Clemson University. I want to thank you for tuning in again for another episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. So this one is going to be a little bit different. As I'm recording, this is our 12th episode and the last one for the season. I'm going to take a little bit of break over the summer and dive into another project. I'm actually developing another online course, which I'm super pumped about. So this podcast, I normally invite a guest on to talk about, what they're doing, their industry, their company, some unique aspect about them. However, this course that I'm developing right now, a key component of that is to develop standard operating procedures unique to their organizations. Now, I know, when people talk about, SOPs, standard operating procedures, this is not something that is like flying their hair back. It's not the most exciting thing, but it's really, really important to be able to kind of think through in a calm environment when you don't have, your hair on fire in the middle of an emergency or something like that, to kind of map out what the organization's plan is. How are they going to operate their UAS program? And again, it's a way to think through it, and the actual writing of it is a way to think through it, but then you document it by putting it down in a Word document or whatever it happens to be to memorialize that for, future operations, and then you don't have to remember every single thing. So I'm really excited about this course. I'm actually developing custom AI bots using ChatGPT, and we're going to train them on some of the better SOPs that are out there from government agencies and things like that. And then I'm processing right now of coding them and embedding them into the course so that users and students can just enter in specific information about their company and what the uniqueness about their scenario, and then these bots will generate sections of their SOPs that can be modified and tailored to the specific aspects of their organization. I'm really, really excited about that. But, as I am doing that, I am neck deep in SOPs. I am reading them and evaluating them and taking the good stuff out and adding it to ours in all candor to make it better and all those kind of good things. And so I'm just steeped in SOPs and learning about the different processes that other organizations are doing. And I'm just, at this point of my career life, however you want to say, just excited about that. As excited as you can be about SOPs, that is where I'm at right now. And because I have this knowledge is fresh in my mind, and I have this experience of just reviewing everyone's manuals and what they're doing, I want to just record a session just without a guest for this go around anyway, and just share what I am learning about what companies are doing and organizations and public agencies across the country with their SOPs and their UAS programs. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to organize this discussion in really, 5 or 6 different blocks. And I'll be honest with you, I've made notes. So as I'm recording this, I'm looking at a Word document where I've made notes to myself to make sure that I hit certain things to talk about. Now, when I go through these things, and again, these 6 things are going to be the management systems, operations, training, maintenance, and the safety management system. And then a last one, which I've just called other, because of other things you want to incorporate. Now, with those different kind of major blocks, I don't want to suggest that, goodness to gracious, you have to have in here, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know your organization specifically, but these are things that I'm just kind of putting out in the ethos of things to be thinking about as you are putting your own SOPs together. So hopefully food for thought. So under the first heading of management systems, It's important to put in your roles and responsibilities. Now, I'm going to, start this caveat by saying, or discussion with a caveat that, your organization might be a 1 or 2 person operation, and then someone else's might be literally dozens, if not more, of drone pilots at various different levels. Some are full-time, some are part-time. So there's a wide range here. So again, I'm just putting this out in the ethos of things to consider. If you are working for a larger organization that you might need buy-in, something that you might consider doing is forming a UAS committee. This committee might not, do any missions or fly anything, but there's an advisory role where they kind of provide, oversight, and that's a benefit to you. But also another benefit would be that they're coming from different organizations or different departments within your organization to be an inroad and someone who's an advocate for you and communicating what you're doing to those other different departments, and then be a kind of a two-way street of communication. So committee members don't necessarily need to do anything. Maybe just show up for, a 20-minute Zoom call every month, learn what you're doing, provide oversight, ask the probing questions, not a big heavy lift in terms of time commitment for them. But again, because they are involved, again, you now have a broader reach and can have an advocate in those different departments and someone who can advertise the services that you might be able to provide. Other things, operations manager, and this could be called different role, but somebody who oversees the program, someone who's not just a committee and shows up for meetings, but actually managing the nuts and bolts. A chief pilot that oversees maybe other regular pilots, a lead trainer, a flight instructor. That flight instructor might fall underneath the lead trainer. Maybe they're the same person, but maybe one lead trainer, oversees multiple different divisions. A flight instructor just manages the flight proficiency training in specific regions. Safety manager, and the safety manager may be specific to UAS or maybe for the whole company. RPICs, visual observers, Air Boss, if you're familiar with AUVSI, that's a role. And again, they're not the origin or the originators of that, but Air Boss, when you have multiple missions going on simultaneously in the same facility, those are things. Think through also what kind of certification your organization is going to require. More than likely, all your pilots are going to have a Part 107. Maybe they're flying under COAs, and even if they are, probably a Part 107 is a likely thing you're going to want them to have. Do you want them to have the APSA BPERP? Do you want them to take the APSA BPERP and get a better time on that or something like that? AUVSI has their trusted operator program, level 1, 2, and 3. Do you require that? Thermography levels. Then typically there is a level 1, 2, and 3. Where do you want your folks to fall? OSHA, that's typically by the hour. I mean, there's a 10-hour, 40-hour, whatever. Do you want them to have certain, OSHA experience? Again, that OSHA card will be much more comprehensive than just drones, of course, but is that a certification you want them to have? Insurance, again, this is typically done. You buy it. Your organization tells you what the premium is. Do you want, general liability or hull? A decision is made. You pay a bill and you move forward. If you're a smaller operation, maybe like an entrepreneur, there are places where you can buy insurance by the hour. If that is your practice, maybe not every mission requires insurance. Again, you have to look at your own appetite for risk and see where's that at. But if you're buying insurance by the hour, definitely something you want on your mission checklist to make sure that you're buying those. Every drone is going to need to be registered, even if they're under 0.55 pounds. If you're listing this, it's because you're doing commercial operations, so they're going to be registered. It's good to have a line in there that reinforces that you are doing what the law says. And then, having some kind of declaration of compliance in there or operator's declaration that basically, I don't want to say it's generic, but a little bit generic that says, your pilots, by agreeing to operate a drone on your organization's behalf, you are going to fly with good airmanship principles and within the bounds of ethics, and however you want to phrase that, but use it as a kind of a catch-all statement. It's impossible to write any kind of manual or regulation or anything that just can identify every scenario that's possible that's out there. So you can never write a policy to address everything, but you can have some catch-all clauses in there that kind of cover the less frequent or the more improbable type of scenarios that could be in there, but still, kind of covers the overall principles. Let me talk about operations here. Okay, so this will likely be a thicker section of your SOP manual, but this is going to govern, how you actually operate your program. And a big, significant section of this is going to be like your general mission planning. What are the protocols for a quote unquote normal mission? Who authorizes it? Where is the equipment stored, and who gives that equipment out? We'll talk more about maintenance in a little bit, but who's responsible for maintaining the equipment? Who's responsible for inspecting the equipment? Yes, the RPIC has to look at it every time it goes out in the mission, but who's doing it when it's back at the office, and who's responsible when the RPIC says there is a problem with it? A lot of organizations will do a formal risk assessment. Sometimes these are called FRATs, flight risk assessment techniques, or there are other different acronyms. But anyway, some kind of tool, flight risk assessment tool. Actually, I blanked on on the last letter of the acronym there. But whatever it happens to be, some kind of methodology for you to identify the risk associated with a mission. And if it exceeds a certain threshold, commonly done with like a number or something like that, what's the next steps after that? What is a normal mission? Sometimes, when things are unnormal or, it's obvious, but, what's the wind speed? Well, like specifically, is it 5 knots? Is it 15 knots? Is it 20? If you've got like a hurricane coming through that's 75 miles an hour, that's like obviously an unusual high risk mission, and likely not one that you'd want to participate in. But what's the actual number? Because you're going to get in that specificity where you have pilots are going to do a mission says it's kind of windy out there, it's sunny. Am I allowed to go? Yes, no. What's the number? Define it now and be consistent with it. Develop pre-flight procedures and checklists. Huge fan of checklist. If you've taken my courses, you know that in the Berg manual, I've got checklists that you start a week out, then a day out, then the day of, but before you leave your office, then when you're out in the field, the checklist, and then when you come back, the post-mission checklist. Big fan, and maybe that's my dyslexic brain, whatever. But it's having a list down there frees my limited mental capacity to be worried about other things. If I have written it down, I don't really think about it. Flight logs, yes, your drone will probably record a lot of that on its own, but not everything. And if you have to be a way somehow to document those flight logs, and they can be a paper copy. And there's some value to that, especially like with my students. A lot of times I have paper copies, and I do that. So at the bottom of their flight logs and their checklist and things like that, they have to sign their name. There's power in that. It's really easy just to do something electronically, click, 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 you're on your way. But if you have to sign your name to something, it has a little more weight to it. Maintenance log, I'll talk more about maintenance in a little while, but what is recorded, who does the maintenance, who authorizes it, who makes the call about when a unit is out of service. Sometimes if it's obvious, but there's always gray, and having those lines is very, very useful. And then defining what non-normal and high-risk missions are. Just because they're high risk doesn't necessarily mean you don't do it. It just might mean there's additional mitigating steps that you need to take. And so what are those? And then what is a point where if these conditions are met, you just don't fly. The winds are above X miles an hour. Whatever flying in these type of scenarios, if you have to fly near traffic or people or children or whatever, those are for your organization. Those are non-starters, and just, you're grounded, and that's just known things moving forward. Also, in your operations section, you should identify clearly what needs to be documented. Flight logs, maintenance logs, some of these are, risk assessments. Those are things that are a little bit more obvious. But maybe there's some other things. How about, your training, your number of hours that you fly, additional above and beyond training, whatever it is that you need to document, that needs to be, documented and listed so that everyone knows. And if your chief pilot or whoever manages the drone program goes someplace else, or someone is promoted up to it, or something goes sideways with a pilot, you need to have those things identified, so that if worst case scenario, someone needs to get terminated on your staff, right? They get fired. It's a lot easier to do that. It's like, here are the SOPs that we follow, and you did not do this. Of course, I'm going to a bad place, but you kind of get the gist. Now, listing what is documented is good, but then you have to have methods for doing it. And it could be as simple as, an Excel spreadsheet. I'm not saying that's necessarily the best, but I love Excel. Excel is my, I use that for everything. But there are other tools out there, Aloft, drone logbooks. There are others that are out there that help you with those, that fleet management stuff. Training. This is definitely another thing that should be in your SOPs, probably as its own defined section. But in this, you need to identify what your initial training looks like. And likely it will be a Part 107. Okay, that's good. I mean, that's essential, required, all that kind of good stuff. But it's certainly not enough. What about the flight practical side? Do they need to pass some kind of practical test? Is that the BPERP? Okay, there's value to that, and I certainly endorse it. I'm an APSA BPERP proctor, and I'm fully on board, but it's not comprehensive. What about situational awareness, risk assessment, flying in confined spaces, doing checklists for your equipment? What happens if things goes wrong? BPERP has its place, but it is a stick control assessment. It is measuring how you're able to operate the sticks. Very, very useful, but is that all you need? Maybe it's a doing the NIST and then an oral exam type of thing with the proctor. Yeah, it could be. Whatever it happens to be for your company, document it. And I'm not saying one thing is right or the other, but in the coolness of your air conditioning office, when things are not stressful and your hair's not on fire, figure it out. Think through it, what works for your company. And then almost always, I mean, and I say really always, there's the initial training, but then what about the recurrent training? I mean, at a minimum, the FAA requires you to do recurrent training, right? And it's just an online class every couple of years, and that's fine. It is, but someone has to track that. So again, kind of a nod back to documentation. Who's tracking the recurrent training and to make sure that your pilots are doing that? And how is that? How are they flagged that their recurrent training is about to expire and need to get it done within X number of days or whatever? How about practical training? Like who's going back out and making sure that someone has the stick skills? And I guess if someone is flying like every couple of days, it's not a big deal. But for infrequent flyers, it is very common for people to learn to use drones, do drones for a job, and then not need them for a few months because they're doing something else. Drone flying is not their full-time job. How frequently do they need to fly to retain their currency? Kind of, I don't have any data to back this up, but my gut tells me after about 30 days of non-flying, your skills start to go down. Does that mean it goes from nothing, goes from really good to nothing? No, but the longer you wait, the rustier you get. That's just human nature. So what happens after 30 days or 60 days or 90 days of not flying? Do you have to start from zero? Probably not, but maybe a practice test or a training test, go out in the boneyard or something and fly around for 20 minutes before you go on the mission. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe some time on the simulator. I don't know. But you need to kind of, again, think through it for your organization. Maintenance. All right. So this should be in your SOP manual. Now, if you are likely, if you're listening to this podcast and are finding it useful, you are not working for an organization that has large predator style, over 55-pound type of drones. More than likely, if you're listening to this, you are in the, commercially available DJI, Autel, SCiDUC, world where you're using drones that are off the shelf. And there's not, I got to be careful with how I say this, but there's not tons of maintenance in that at least for me anyway, again, I'm not telling you what to do, but at least for me, I don't crack into the hull of any of my drones. That is a liability I'm not willing to absorb. I crack it open and I wouldn't know what I'm really looking at anyway. There's circuit boards and, motors and things like that. And I kind of feel like I would do more damage than I would repair it. So most of the time, if something's not working, it goes to the manufacturer, and that's our policy. That's what we do. Okay. Exceptions to that are maybe batteries, propellers, again, based off the manufacturer, but some people say 200 hours after use, and whether it's clipped or chipped or otherwise, even if it's not after 200, you have micro fatigues and micro factors on the propellers, they got to be replaced out. So there's some maintenance. Batteries after 150 cycles, I'm not saying that's the number based off whatever your manufacturers say, go with that, of course. After X number of cycles, those batteries go to the training fleet. They're not for real missions. What is the service life of your drone, right? They don't last forever, right? Nothing made with man's hands lasts forever. So what about, when do the motors fail, right? And you could say, well, they're brushless, motors. Okay, and that's good. That's great, but they don't last forever. Nothing lasts forever. So at what point do those motors need to be replaced? And typically when the motors need to be replaced, that's the end of the service life of the drone. So, when do they need to be retired or at least go to the training fleet, that type of thing? I would definitely encourage you to require all of your drones to have a manual that goes with them. And a part of that manual or the binder is the manufacturer's manual. Then the next step is to read that and see what it says. And then obviously follow that or have a really good reason for why you're not. And you got to be really careful with going against the manufacturer's recommendations. I can't, off the top of my head, think of it any time I would do that. But put that there. And then any kind of maintenance that you do, log it, right? Even if it's simple as replace the propellers, when was the last time you did that? If you're doing it every 200 hours, starting from when? And then when you put new propellers on, then how long do those go? Definitely want to have a section in there. Safety management systems, SMS is a very common acronym. I like to think of SMS, safety management system, or I like to think of it as a system to manage safety. All right. So, how do you manage your safety? Who's responsible for that? It's important to put in your manual, that your company has a safety culture and what those expectations are. What is it? And again, some good generic verbiage in there about covering all safety operations. Operating in a professional manner, never putting anything at risk, because you're never going to write a safety manual that covers every scenario, but you do want to cover the important stuff as well as have some language that covers the things that you can never think of. I personally, again, my background's in construction, so safety was a really big deal for us as it should be. I found success when I would run a project. I would require my folks to write down a safety management statement. And this is just something that's unique to them that says, something like, I, Joe Burgett, I promise that I'm going to start every day knowing that every person that steps onto my job site has the God-given right to leave this job site in the same shape that they showed up. And I'm going to do everything in my power and I'm going to encourage everyone in my circle of influence to do the same thing. There's just something that came from me that I wrote that's in my language that means something to me. And then I would take that piece of paper, I'm a big, hard copy paper, look at my, someone who, my employee or someone who was reporting up to me, stare in their eyeballs and say, look, I see this is good, but I'm looking in your eyeballs. You mean this, right? Yeah. And those type of things that internalize it. If your company might do toolbox talks. Again, that's a construction term, but basically before any mission, you huddle up around the toolbox and you talk through what the most probable risks are. And then what I think about it are like, what are the risks? What could happen bad? How do you prevent that bad thing from happening? And then what do you do if that bad thing happens? That's kind of how I like to think about safety. But then you can also include in your SOP manual about, how accidents and incidents are logged. Accidents and incidents are two different things, but how are they recorded? If an OSHA card is required, what PPE is required? Again, there's a lot of variation on that. If you do work in construction sites, that might mean hard hats and not the same hard hats that everyone else wears, right? Because if you're a drone operator, you're staring, up in the sky and the traditional hard hat will fall off your head. So there's other types of hard hat with a chin strap that keeps it from falling off. So there's different things like that. Do you require vests? Do you require gloves? What kind of gloves? Because, there's all kinds of different things. Long pants, boots, what other type of things do you require your folks to wear? Safety training, obviously, denoting in your safety manual what safety training is required for the pilots, and then maybe even like what training is required for the trainers and who is the trainer, going back to the roles and responsibilities. So those are the kind of the key sections that I think are important with an SOP. And again, I'm not stating anything that you should do, but things to think about as you're putting your SOPs together. I'm going to close it here with the other thing. So just some general things to kind of think about. One, think of your SOP manual as a tool. You're writing it as if you're trying to do something with it. Do not be thinking about it necessarily as if you're in front of a judge or that it's flowery or that this is like the ideal scenario. Write your SOPs as if you're going to use it to guide your operations. No more, no less. Don't use flowery language because it sounds good. State what you mean simply, shortly, simplistically, and accurately. Just put in there. Think of it as a tool. Be careful with your level of specificity. Don't put things in there that you're not going to do or that you're not going to track. Because, from a liability point of view, if you put things in your SOPs and then don't do it, you're just opening yourself up. Your Honor, yeah, I put it in there. Well, on cross, they'll say, you put it in there, so you obviously recognize that this XYZ action was important. You said you were going to do it, and then you didn't, and then this bad thing happened. In that scenario, better to be silent. Obviously, the best scenario is that you put in that likely scenario, and you follow the procedure, and then nothing bad happened because you followed the right steps. So be careful with this, with the level of specificity. Don't put anything in there that you're not going to be doing. Always be thinking about, maybe as a guts check instead of thinking about it in front of a courtroom when something bad did happen and you're talking to the judge or the lawyers or whatever. Think about it from an audit point of view. If someone, a team member in your company, is going to look at your book and say, hey, look, you said you were going to track maintenance. Let me see your maintenance log. And if you got nothing, or it's inconsistently kept, or whatever, then that's obviously something to correct. Make sure your SOP is attractive. And I don't mean like, colored font everywhere in different sizes, but, using figures when they're important, having the company logo, being accurate and stating things in conclusion and fruition is good, but not necessarily, overly wordy or whatever, but make sure that it looks good, easy to navigate, that the table of contents is meaningful, things are titled intuitively, and you're able to navigate around. Again, this is a tool that you want to use, but you want it to be something that's so, boring that it's intimidating. Someone won't open it up. Have a revision log in there so you know when it is updated. And every time it is updated, update that revision log and have that, front of the page. Flowcharts, as I said, images are helpful. If pictures are good, if they support the SOP. Again, the SOP is a technical document. So it's not like a literary read, right? It is. So if a picture helps explain something, especially if you have annotations and arrows and stuff, then that's fine. But, don't use it just to make it more interesting. Acronym list, UAS is a lot like a lot of trades and industries where we have our own list of acronyms: UAS, UAV, SOPs, PPEs, VOs, RPICs. I mean, we got a whole bunch of them, right? AGL, MSL. I mean, we got a million acronyms. So define them in case someone else doesn't know all of those acronyms. It's one place to go, and then maybe even not just define what the acronym stands for, but actually maybe a short definition, something on there. And then finally, my quote unquote other grouping is appendix. Anytime, it is nice for SOPs to be kind of a one-stop shop for all of the documents, and having, if you're using paper copies of your checklist and your FRATs, your flight risk assessment tools, your incident and accident reports, maintenance log, any flight logs, all of those things, that any paper copies that you are requesting your pilots or people in the program to use, it's nice to have a one place to find them, or at least. Again, I mean, I'm not necessarily a proponent of always using paper copies, especially in the digital world, and if you're using some kind of fleet management software. But use appendix as best you can, and put those documents in there, if nothing else, as an example, with a note of where you can find the electronic version of those to be supporting your unit. So with all that said, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys for kind of indulging me as we do a little bit of a different scenario here. No guest this time, but I really, really enjoyed this podcast. Again, as we wrap these things up, this is going to be the end of the first season. I look forward to coming back with more guests and, kind of supporting the mission, bringing real people into the discussion that are doing this stuff day in and day out, people that have a level of expertise that can share their story with you. And again, it just adds seasoning to the whole UAS community. So thank you guys for supporting us for this first season. We do look forward to coming back and continuing this. We really appreciate all of the emails that we get and the support and how this is giving you guys new things to think about. So thank you for those emails and of encouragement. And we do look forward to doing more. Don't have a specific time frame right this second here, probably, maybe in the fall is kind of what I'm looking at, but don't hold me to that, but I will definitely be sending that out, blast via email and on the website and all that kind of good stuff. So thanks for hanging in there, guys, and safe flying. And let me know if there's anything that we can do to support or help your program. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Clemson Drone Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more about our online training offerings by going to clemsondrone.com. Thanks again. And remember, at Clemson Drone, the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning.